Welcome to those that have joined us already. Thank you for coming in promptly and early. I'm Sharon Constançon. I am Chief Executive of VALUFIN, which is a group of foreign exchange companies based in both South Africa and the UK. So thank you very much. We've got a good number coming into the room, and hopefully we'll have a few questions at the end. What I'm doing in this series is giving a very high level overview of the kinds of things chief execs, finance directors, senior financial people in the company need to know are areas of consideration when they're looking at foreign exchange risk management. So this is not a deep dive into any aspect, but what we're looking at is a framework so that you have a cheat sheet that you can always use to make sure that you're addressing all the foreign exchange matters that you need to. So to get started, I'm just going to start with picking up some slides that we covered in the original overview, then looking specifically at the assess area of the framework, and then we'll look at a couple of diagrams, and then we'll close. We will then follow this through for the entire framework, and we'll pick up a summary at the end. So thank you very much again for having joined us. We've got a good number of people present. The first thing I'd just like to make clear and understanding for yourselves is Forex is difficult. It is complex. Every company is unique. There's no one size fits all. Because of the nature of the volatility in the Forex markets, it's always different. Today is different to yesterday, and today is different to tomorrow. So we have a complex environment, in which case we have all the different instruments, we have the different liquidity issues, we have the different providers, we have all sorts of complexities around structuring our Forex management. We then have to deal with an extremely volatile market. So I was preparing a report this morning, for example, and looking at the range of high and low in certain currencies just in the month of May. And we were seeing sort of 2% variances just in 4 weeks. Now, that is now becoming commonplace. So there are opportunities as a result of that, and there are complexities, and there are absolutely risks as a result of this. So we need to make sure that we are available to pick up the opportunity element and protect ourselves against the risks. There is no training. If you've done an accounting degree or accounting experience, or even done Forex in another company, even done Forex in a bank, you have got no direct training for the environment you're in today. So it really is a place to turn to outside specialists, as you would for HR or for legal or for any other form of professional advice. This is exactly the same thing. So it really is important that we can help you understand the uniqueness of your own business, how to interact with the volatile market, and to deal with all the complexities that are there just generically because of the market. So we've created a framework, and the reason for a framework is it just makes it easier to work through methodically the different areas you need to consider and ensure that you are addressing everything. So using the name of the company, we've come up with a framework called VALUFIN, which looks at the value of it, assessing the risks, learning about your business, understanding the implications of Forex for your company, finding the various solutions, dealing with the internal processes, and finding out now where you are in a new learned experience where you actually have got value that you have now determined. We covered an overall in the first one. The next session we covered value. And today we're going to look at assess. We're going to assess the areas of your own business, which is these items listed down on the left-hand side. And we're going to go through each one in detail. Sorry, lots of words, but it does give you a framework for you once again to take this and look at your own business and understand what kind of changes you can make. So thank you very much for your time. So the assess stage is, how do we source information about your business and its trading activities? Where are we going to look? What are the things we're going to look for? And what are we going to do with that information? Potentially we will cover later. So the things that we're going to look for is where in the business Forex arises, when does it arise, how your different cycles of business activity are going to impact the way that information will come to you and the way the risks will arise. So we'll identify those different sources, and we need to be absolutely practical about how do you get that information. Do it in a way that doesn't require a lot of additional work. And today with systems, APIs, plugins, artificial intelligence, there are many ways in which we can get to information that doesn't necessarily require any additional work by anyone in the organization. Requires a bit of thinking through, but it can be done. So if we look at business knowledge, we need to look at what countries we're in, what currency pairs, the kind of order cycles and processes that we might have. For example, I was talking to a company the other day who works with a consultant as for importers to understand the impact of duties and how that can be managed to save money for the business, to get things through customs faster, and different tricks of the trade. We are directly correlated to that kind of support and advice you might get from a shipper or from a logistics organization or from a consultant. We are alongside that because none of them ever cover the foreign exchange element. So we will also look at your manufacturing timelines, credit lines that you might be offered, credit lines you may offer, and the kind of shipping challenges you might have outside of pandemic under normal conditions, and what kind of things might you suffer if we were to suffer another global logistics crisis. Who are your suppliers? What countries are they in? What kind of organizations are they? Are they large? Are they small? How reliable might they be to deliver on the promise of the original order? What sort of pricing policy do you have internally? And how would that differ depending on the product line, the customers, the season, the way you might be working? And then all those areas I've just covered now have decision-making points within them. How do you go about those decision points? Are they delegated down into the chain as a process, or are they kept at a higher level where they actually are done to add value to the organization and to get the right decisions made in the first place? The starting point for the organization will be your forecast or budget. Now, we know that the reality will be something different, but you can't plan unless you have some degree of accuracy and understanding of what those values might be, the way they might come to you as a pattern within the season or an entire year. Now, many companies have got seasonal flows, which we'll talk about in a moment. Then we need to know, how does Forex relate to the overall budget of the company? Does the company have a turnover of 20 million, of which 2 million is Forex? Or do they have a turnover of 20 million, of which 19 million is Forex? So it's understanding the relativity of Forex to the greater business, and therefore the direct impact it has on the bottom line and on the risks to the business and on the way you're going to price your products to your customer. And making sure that during the year, we might have reforecast 1, reforecast 2. Some customers even have reforecast 3, where we are reviewing the remainder of the year to understand what reality is going to be against the original budget. So we need that kind of information as well to make sure that you are keeping up to date with actually what the risk profile is that needs to be hedged. We then look at the order cycles. How frequently do you order? How big are the orders? What kind of content might an order have? Do you have orders with multiple product lines, or do you just have it very specifically related to a customer? So do you back-to-back your order to your sales? Yeah, what kind of logic does the business go through? Many companies, it's ongoing business, and they will be picking up supplies according to their budget, estimated sales, market demands within their customer base, and then for doing the foreign exchange according to that. So some companies might, for example, order just in time, totally match, or as we said, seasonally or regularly. There's various ways in which to do it. How does those goods come to you? Is the urgent stuff air freighted? Is the normal stuff shipping? What kind of shipping lead times do you have in your organization? What kind of delays might occur within the shipping cycle? Are there things like a tsunami or an earthquake, or just logistics of where ships are at the moment? Or is there something that the customer does or does not have priority loading facilities where they have to get your goods onto ships? And that might apply if you're exporting. What kind of priority do you have to get your goods onto the ship available? Are you being bumped onto the next ship in terms of time management, which obviously impacts your Forex directly? The kind of reporting we look at is, what is that gap? What is that difference? What is it costing the company to have that kind of change within the business environment, which is completely normal, but it has a cost. So we need to understand that. So if you have something you understand, you can manage it and therefore end up in a better outcome. So making sure that we've understood the invoice cycle too. So we start with an order cycle, and then there's the invoice cycle. Invoices can be raised at any point from departure from a store, loading on a ship, in transit when risk transfers according to an insurance policy, on arrival, on shipping to the ultimate destination, or arrival at ultimate destination. Now, your invoice can be raised at any of those cycles, depending on the agreement you have with your customer or your supplier. And making sure that you then understand what is the time lag from that invoice to the date of payment. Is it on 7 days? Is it month end? Is it statement plus 60 days? What might it be? And there can be variations to the payment cycle you might have, but that is directly correlated to your foreign exchange management, that you need to take that into consideration. Also, when you have invoices, are they parts of an order? Are they amalgamation of parts of orders, or are they matched perfectly to an order or to pieces of a product line from a specific customer? There are various ways in which you see orders raised depending on how they were shipped, how pallets are put together, how containers are filled. Making sure that you also have the understanding that dynamic between the order being raised and the actual payment now that needs to flow, and understanding to what degree there still is change in that cycle that is possible. So we're then looking at variations. Business will have variations all the time. Orders change, supply changes, invoice changes, all sorts of things are constantly in change. It's the degree of change that we need to have a look at. Are there massive changes in volume or timing or content, or is it relatively minor? Is it within 10%? Yeah. And those kind of things make a difference in how the Forex is managed. So it will depend also on your customer, on the liability you have to make payment to them, to retain relationships or discounts or special offers that you might have, and then looking at what the impact is on your cash flow. What does that do to your cash flow management? And making sure that you understand the impact of that in local currency as well as in foreign currency, and in relation to the instruments that you have in the portfolio. And making sure that you are always risk managing for that constant morphing change that the business is going through. So as we say to finance people, be careful to delegate too much of this kind of decision making into the system, because you can just understand from the slide we've just been through, there is so much change that's occurring. And if that is not managed correctly, costs do leak into the system very, very quickly. So if we look at seasons, we see that particularly in agriculture or in fashion, for example, where we see the different buying cycles between the customers in different hemispheres, production of food and goods in different hemispheres. And invariably, for example, an agricultural season is often about 6 months, somewhere between 3 and 9, but it is a shorter cycle invariably than a year. But you do have other products that are not products that will decay, that will last a year in storage, for example, in which case you've got a smooth year, even though you're in agriculture. You might look at things, for example, that are in the fashion industry. They design anything up to 2.5 years before it reaches the customer. So there's a long Forex cycle with varying degrees of risk in a cycle of that nature. You also have a very high risk in the Forex area when goods are offloaded or are stuck on ships where duties are not paid, customs become an issue, pandemic gets in the way, and goods decay either on quayside or on a ship. And those too have a Forex element upon the pricing to your customer and therefore to your P&L line as well, because sometimes the goods are completely damaged. And now what is the Forex impact of that? So you might see in, for example, CapEx, that there is a longer lead cycle in the CapEx environment as well. Sorry, guys, I will just have to stop the recording here for a moment. I can't see where the gentleman is. Hopefully that will be addressed elsewhere. We can now revert on the recording back to where we were. So the area that we want to discuss now is liquidity. Liquidity is both the requirement for foreign currency, but also it's the requirement for local currency. So to what extent are we buying euros or selling dollars, or involved in the renminbi, for example, or we might be in the Nordic or Swiss countries, but we are home-based, either in sterling or rand or euros, whatever our base currency might be, and we then need to manage both our impact of Forex on our home currency cash flow statement, but equally for each of those currencies as well, to understand what we require, what we've got on hold, where those deposits might be, and how those might be managed. But also there's an accounting element to that, but we'll cover that in a later session. Making sure that we understand the risk of the changes, all those things we've talked about in the previous slide, two slides, how those impact the cash flow, how it impacts your Forex portfolio, and how it impacts the decisions you're going to make, and where you put in control functions, what it is that you want to manage so that you mitigate the risk at all times. The important thing we've got here is risk determination. What are the risks to the business? So looking at the Forex management side and managing these risks. So we've got to look at the cycles that we've talked about and where from day one to day end that risk is arising, making sure that you determine the risk. For example, if a company has set a price of their product for the 6 months, for example, their risk determination on an order is very different to somebody who says, I price at 5% above cost. They have a very different risk cycle. So can you pass the risk on? Have you got a buffer in the accounting area, which in itself is an area for concern? And the other aspect is, what is it doing to your P&L line as this Forex element is changing? And making sure that we do the right things internally, empower our staff to know when to look for support, when to go up the chain for decision making, when to report in the form of the normal reporting that something abnormal has had an impact on the portfolio, on the profit, on the cash flow, on credit, all those different elements. So if we're looking at the market risks, the Forex market is changing all the time. We are on average seeing anything up to 2% a month. That was happening up and down. So we see it moving in, but today, in these day and ages, much wider bands in a period of a month, 3 or 6 months, than we might have seen before. And if you look forward in the forecasted rates, we see a wide variety between the 10 top forecasting banks as to where they expect the various key currencies to be in the next 12 months. And the variation looks like a scattergun. It is very, very broad. So even amongst those who are in the know, the answer is just not clear at all as to what to expect. So we don't know what's going to happen, and we have to mitigate the risk to our business as a result of that. So if we're looking at the cash flow, we're looking at the portfolio, we're looking at the market rates, we're looking at our internal business, we're looking at our purchasing managers' incentive program. There are all sorts of things in the business that are impacted by this risk. So the company needs to determine its appetite. It needs to determine then what its policy is, which we covered in the first session. And then we've got to look at how are you going to carry out the actions that the company still is proactive to the market and not reactive. And obviously working with banks and brokers, they only know the market, whereas you know your business. And that is the important element, which then balances out the risk profiles that we talked about at the beginning in that original diagram. So just to come towards our conclusion is looking at what are the influencing factors you're having to deal with as a finance person in any importing or exporting business anywhere in the world. You're dealing with the market, something you have no control of. It is the largest, most liquid market in the world, and it is changing all the time. And that is a fact. You can't change that, but you can work out how can you tolerate that in your business, and therefore what actions can you take. And every company is absolutely unique in the kind of structures it will put in place to manage it. And something will be around systems, it'll be around the people, around the knowledge in the business, around the customers. So all these things are going to influence the uniqueness of the company to Forex management. We have global influences like pandemics, wars, break in supply chains, different areas of the world changing their product lines, their integration into global markets, offerings coming from new destinations, trade wars between some of our major nations, political wars, political infighting internally within countries. So there are a lot of elements that are impacting our Forex market over and above the economics of non-farm payrolls, interest rates, employment statistics, economic statistics. So over and above those, we have all these other business influences. And the other aspect we need to take into consideration is the degree of Forex knowledge within the business. What training, experience, skills people might have learned elsewhere or on the job. And to what extent, therefore, you bring in that additional knowledge, either as a guidance or as a service. So you've got various ways in which you can address the knowledge factor that you need to. One of the biggest knowledge factors to deal with is technology. The technology that is available in the market is not necessarily designed to be a decision-making corporate tool. It's more often a platform for ease of operations for flow through payment systems, for example. You might have it where it's all on the sell side. It's related to what the transactions are you've done, but doesn't relate to your underlying business. So we have got many different tools out there that give different degrees of competence and insight for your business. The one used most often is Excel. The one that probably has the greatest degree of risk is Excel because it's flat. It is not dynamic. It doesn't interact readily with information change and does require a lot of manual and therefore high risk of errors in the Excel environment. But it is probably the most commonly used. So if we look at the different instrument components, we've got the various providers, banks, brokers, platforms, payment portals, different kinds of solutions that are available. We have different instruments that are available, spots, forwards, derivative of forwards, which there are many kinds. And then you've got the actual derivative and option market itself. We have time. Is time a day or is time 12, 18 months? So we've got very wide time horizons that we will be dealing with depending on your business. We have the interest rates of your own country and interest rates of that you are trading with internationally. And that interest rate differential, that gap between those two interest rates, defines whether you buy forward at an improved rate, a discount, or at a worse rate, a premium, and it's the opposite for importers and for exporters. And then we have this volatile liquid spot market, which is what the rate is right now. And if you look at any Forex rate screen, it is flashing all the time with ups and downs consistently. So to close, I would just like to summarize the areas of Forex that you need to consider from a bigger picture point of view. You've got the risk that comes from the providers who are very market focused, and they are limited in business knowledge and business focus of your specific business as you need it and what your specific accounting and customer needs are. So they don't have that degree of insight, but they do have a good degree of insight of the market. But they need a trade, they need to do volume. They will often try and sell you new products that have been designed, which appear very practical or very useful, but invariably do have a risk element to them or do have a cost element to them. Both can apply. So once we've got past risk from the providers, we have to look at the risk of the actual spot rates and the interest rates, and therefore our future rates. And then what we've got to look at is the correlation between the business and the market and how we're going to deal with our risk appetite. We're then going to look at the reporting we need, who needs reports, when do they need it, why do they need it, what are they going to do with that information? And then we get to the decision-making element for the business and how those decisions made. How do you document how the decision was made? On what basis and evidence was available at that moment in time? Now that sounds onerous, and in many companies that would be onerous to document that kind of content every single time a decision is made, which is anything up to daily. But it is critical because you need to understand after the fact, where you've got this perfect hindsight science, that actually you did things for the right reason given the information available to you at the time. If you had made the wrong decision, now with hindsight, you can learn from that, but you can't do that unless you've got evidence of how you did what and why. So that covers the end of our assess section on the currency management VALUFIN framework. So I thank you for all your time. And I see we do have a question. So just to paraphrase the question, the delegate has asked, how do I, as a finance director, who is specifically a very business-oriented finance director rather than a record, an accurate operational aspect of the business. So somebody who's a lot more correlated to the CEO, the vision and mission of the business, rather than head of finance, who is literally in the finance function. And the question is, how can they understand what their risks are internally? And my question is, going back to the slide right at the beginning, it is complex. There are many elements to look at. But I would start, for example, by addressing, what does your chain look like? Who is touching foreign exchange? And plot that chain and try and understand to what extent they are reacting to the flow of process and paperwork and instructions, and to what extent are they being proactive in watching what the market's doing relative to the business. Now, invariably, you will find it is very process driven. So as a guidance, look for what is that process and see what it is. And quite often you will see we cover everything that is a liability. Well, what is a liability? Does that depend on the customer pricing as to whether it's a liability prior to invoice or not? Is it matched to the customer? In which case, is it a liability at order? So there's many things we need to consider to understand that. But I think the first point is, where are decisions being made in that process? And then to identify whether that is a reactive or a proactive activity. And from there, try and see from the framework that we're offering you how you would go and try and look for improvements. But obviously, I'm there. You're welcome to give me a contact. I apologize for that, but we'll put on the recording a contact details of email address and telephone number. You can look us up on the website, valufin.com, and you can make contact with pleasure. Anybody who's on the session can have a half-an-hour free discussion to try and tease out some of those issues you might have in your business. And obviously, if you wish to take it further, you're more than welcome. So thank you very much. I hope the session 2 of the framework has given you another element of understanding the kinds of issues you need to consider. And I welcome you back for the other 5 elements still to follow of things that you need to consider. Yes, there are 5 more groups of elements we need to still look at before we have got at least a holistic view of what are the things we need to consider as finance directors and business owners in terms of Forex. So thank you very much to everybody. I appreciate the questions, and 1 or 2 others I will address directly. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.